A sense of belonging is what tethers us to those who share in our spaces that work with us. Belonging is fueled by a social connection, which is one of our basic human needs. When you feel safe, supported, and valued, you bring your full authentic self to work and you're fully engaged to work collaboratively to deliver the best patient care and, quite frankly, you be the best teammate ever.
You're listening to the Oncology Nursing Podcast, where ONS Voices talk cancer, a resource from the Oncology Nursing Society. Through conversations with subject matter experts, we examine the important issues in oncology nursing, from new treatments to patient-centered research to advancements in clinical practice. Join us as we hear from nurses in all facets of oncology care, from bench to bedside and everywhere in between. Welcome to the Oncology Nursing Podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Oncology Nursing Podcast. I'm your host, Jaime Weimer, Manager of Oncology Nursing Practice at ONS. And today we're talking with Kecia Boyd, Director of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity in the Department of Nursing and Patient Care Services at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston, Massachusetts, about how nurses can contribute to a community of belonging for peers and patients. As a reminder, you can earn free NCPD contact hours after listening to this episode and completing the evaluation we've linked in the episode notes. Thanks so much for joining us today, Kecia.
Oh, hi, Jaime. I'm happy to be here. I want to share with our audience that I use the she/her pronoun series, and I identify as an African-American Black cisgender woman. I also want to share that I say I-D-N-E, inclusion, diversity, and equity. I put the I, inclusion, in front of the D, diversity. I work at an organization that believes you cannot have diversity and equity without inclusion. So you will hear me say I-D-N-E instead of D-E-N-I throughout the podcast.
Wonderful. Well, so to start off today, Kecia, can you help define what belonging means in the healthcare space? And how is that different from some of those other DEI-related terms like inclusion and the others that you've just mentioned?
The difference between belonging and inclusion, I think, is a great question to start the podcast because it goes to the heart of what we are trying to achieve in the ID&E space. We is a collective we, all the folks working to build a better world through the ID&E lens. So, let's bring it in close, not such a better world, but let's start with our better workplace and our situation, a better healthcare facility for nurses and our patients to truly thrive. So when you come to work, when they come into our health facility for care, that they can arrive authentically and thrive and be well. So inclusion, to define inclusion refers to a set of practices that an organization or a healthcare facility will implement to ensure employees feel safe. Inclusion are the behaviors and actions and social norms. It's how we do things that ensure people feel welcome. So inclusion focuses on engagement and is achieved when every team member feels welcome, respected, supported, and valued. Belonging is how you feel as a result of the inclusion effects. It's the subjective feelings of inclusion. When you feel safe, supported, valued, and loved, friendships are created, a sense of connection to people you share spaces with, and a respect. You can bring your full authentic self to work and be fully engaged to work collectively to deliver the best patient care. So for better understanding, Jaime, how belonging is tied into diversity, inclusion, and equity, let's put it in the context of a party. So let's say diversity is being invited to that party. Equity is receiving the invitation to the party in the way that is right for you. Inclusion is being asked to dance when you get to that party. And a sense of belonging is dancing like nobody's watching.
That's wonderful. I love that example, that analogy. And it really helps to bring it to life and, makes sense. I really appreciate how you created that distinction between inclusivity and inclusion is the things that we can do, but belonging is what happens if we're doing that right. So belonging is the feeling that you have because all the work you're doing to support the I, D, and E creates that sense of belonging. So I really love how you've set that definition up to create that clarity.
Thank you, Jaime.
So why is a strong sense of belonging specifically important, certainly for all members of the healthcare team, but for nurses specifically?
A strong sense of belonging is important for nurses because it will help create and sustain a healthy work environment that fosters excellence in patient care and optimal outcomes for us as staff, as nurses, our patients, and other members of the healthcare team. And here's the reason why. A sense of belonging is what tethers us to those who share in our spaces that work with us. Belonging is fueled by a social connection, which is one of our basic human needs. It's a basic human need that individuals must satisfy to maintain their identity, their physical well-being, and mental health. When you feel safe, supported, and valued, you bring your full authentic self to work, and you're fully engaged to work collaboratively to deliver the best patient care. And quite frankly, you be the best teammate ever. So Jaime, the definition of sense of belonging tells us we are not meant to go through life alone. Humans have historically needed to rely on each other for survival. We are wired for that connection. And I also believe another benefit resulting from connect with each other, with our peers, is building a trusting relationships. Building relationships at work is how we build resilience to our everyday work environment. Resilience allows us to overcome those stressful situations and to adapt positively, resulting in good well-being and mental health.
I love that. And I think something that oftentimes is conflated, but maybe shouldn't be, it's not the same thing as saying your coworkers, your teammates, your colleagues, they don't have to be your best friends. This is not the same thing. We're not saying that the people that you work with, you have to be besties with. There's other components to what creates those types of relationships, but I really appreciate how you're emphasizing why it's so important to feel as though you belong with your teammates, because it does influence and underpin everything you do. And then as a byproduct of that, the care that you're able to provide to your patients. And so if you don't feel like you belong on your unit, in your department, on your team, however you break that down, then that impacts all the work that you do, and also psychologically impacts how you feel about the work that you do and how you feel about yourself. So it is really important, but this is not saying that to be happy at your job, you have to be best friends with everybody you work with.
Absolutely. And I like how you said that too, Jaime, about the relationship and friends, because we all have different relationships with different points in our life. For example, like you were saying, we have a relationship at work. And what are those relationships at work? It's different than one relationship we might have with our family or with other people in our lives. But as you were saying, with that relationship you have at work, building that relationship to get through the day. As we know, we work in a very stressful environments, right? Especially after the pandemic. And so having relations at work, building that trust, building that sense of belonging will help us get through the day to get the work done. So I love how you frame that, Jaime, as about the relations at work. It's not just for our besties, but is really getting that job done, to be able to deliver the best, effective, and efficient patient and family care, doing it together.
Absolutely. So what steps do you recommend to create that welcoming environment in nursing, especially as the field of nursing intentionally and wonderfully becomes more diverse?
I want to answer this question with a question. I want to ask our audience a reflective question. And that question is, how do you make an effort to welcome others and create a sense of belonging? Because in order to create a welcoming environment, I believe we first have to think of our own experiences. What fosters or inhibits a sense of belonging for you? Because I believe it begins with each of us as individuals to do some self-reflecting or some self-awareness. Because a self-reflection will allow us to identify our own unconscious biases. It will allow us to check our assumptions. It will allow us to examine our role of power and privilege, which will lead us to a better understanding about the experiences of historically marginalized groups. And when I say marginalized groups, Jaime, I'm referring to people of color, members of the LGBTQ plus community, disabled. These are just to name some, not an exhaustive list, but just what some of the historically marginalized groups are. And by the self-reflection and by examining ourselves, it would help us see things differently through their lens. Because, Jaime, I believe we've all heard of the golden rule, right? The golden rule focuses on treating others as we like to be treated. This rule was preached to me by my parents, but now it's about the platinum rule. The platinum rule emphasizes understanding and considering others' individual preferences and needs and how they want to be treated.
That's so important. As I was listening to you respond, I'm struck that this is a conversation that applies also when we're thinking of just how our care teams have changed when it comes to welcoming in students or brand new nurses out of nursing school who are on the first day in a unit that maybe typically didn't get new graduates before, or we see an influx of travel nurses. And so this idea of creating a space that is welcoming and belonging can influence so much. And it's important to keep in mind in every context of if you have someone who is on your team or in your space that has not been there before or seems unfamiliar to the environment, just being mindful of how you're creating that welcoming environment for them. All the things that you're bringing up today, I think, are applicable in those situations as well.
Absolutely.
So in what ways do you think healthcare workplaces effectively address both inclusion and a sense of belonging for its employees?
As I shared, inclusion refers to a set of practices that an organization or a healthcare facility will implement to ensure that employees feel safe, that they feel welcome, that they feel that they belong. And that sense of belonging is how you feel from the results of inclusion. So it's about changing the culture of a workplace to be more inclusive. And there's a few ways that an organization can do that. And one way is maybe providing a learning and development opportunities in the IDNA space. For example, like this podcast that we're doing now, it allows us to learn about the sense of belonging, and also our organizations to also promote and learning and development opportunities in this space. We need our organizations to foster a collaborative environment. What I mean by this is to celebrate and leverage diversities. And what does that look like? That can look like when you're onboarding new hires or people are coming into our organization that are students. How do we welcome them? We can welcome them by sharing them, asking questions about their culture, asking questions about their story, or sharing our stories. When you open up and share your stories, they feel reciprocated and they'll share their stories. So I think that's very important. And what I mean by celebrating and leveraging diversity is acknowledging the differences. And how you can acknowledge the differences, like one of the units I work on, there's a big board that we share, and that any celebration, that culture that they may share in that month that they want to share with the rest of us, like whatever the holiday may be that we're not aware of, we post it and we talk about that. So just kind of celebrating and leveraging diversity really helps bring that sense of belonging for employees.
Thank you for that. And I think you've provided some great examples and emphasized how it really is important that the messaging comes from the top down and that it is an organizational wide initiative and effort and priority from the top down to really help to elevate and prioritize the work that is required to ensure that we are creating that sense of belonging, prioritizing diversity, equity, inclusion. What we know is that a lot of times what really happens, the meaningful pieces happen at that unit level. So individual to individual or in that department, because that's when you get to know people and really create that sense of belonging. So can you provide some examples and just speak a little bit more about how nurses can help to create that welcoming and belonging environment on their own floor or their own unit?
I believe that there are many ways that we can build a sense of belonging on that floor, that unit, and it really is tailored to what that floor, that unit needs. But I think there's some basic key items or key ideas in building a sense of belonging. And one of those is connecting with your team. How do you connect with your team? You connect with your team by asking questions and listening, sharing stories, embracing those random connections. What I mean by that is the random connections by offering for help. As you're working on your team, as you may see, as we know, we're taking care of patients in various healthcare settings, and it can get challenging. It gets pretty busy and pretty stressful. And so by offering to help, by the random connections, we talked about sense of belonging, and also sense of belonging is building that relationship. And that's one way you can build a relationship, by offering to help, jumping in. And by jumping in, offering to help, and maybe sharing and saying, oh, I know that's happened to me before, or sometimes I forget to do that. It shares your vulnerability, which opens everybody else to share their vulnerabilities. It's really building that trust and relationship. Sharing stories, asking questions, really connecting with your team. And you do that, you have to talk and you have to listen. So that's important. Also, I believe in embracing our purpose and values and strengths, our individual ones, and also as our peers. By doing that is you're asking for their feedback. You're asking them for their suggestion. You're asking them for their ideas. When you reach out to them and you put them at the table, you want to hear their voice. You want to hear their opinion. That's embracing sense of belonging because you're pulling them in, sitting them at the table. And also too, I think sense of belonging is embracing everybody's differences, our uniquenesses that we bring to the table, that we bring to our unit. Embracing that means to pause and reflect on the different cultures and practices, to make it seem that they're free to talk about their culture and practice, that they're free to be themselves. And that's embracing diversity. And how you can do that, once again, is really, truly, actively listening, asking questions, and embracing those connections and really building that trusting environment.
I love that. And it really, to me, it's two messages that I feel. It's when those things happen, when you feel like people are interested to learn about you or just know more about you or be present and helpful if there's something that you need help with or guidance, it sends the message that I'm not alone. I'm not here all by myself. People acknowledge that I'm here too. And most importantly, somebody cares. Somebody cares about I'm here, or how am I doing, or, what makes me unique or special, or just my own person. And I think those are two really important feelings that maybe we don't always articulate or identify that that's underpinning our sense of belonging. But I think those are two important byproducts of just trying to make those connections with your coworkers, of just making sure that they know that they're not alone and that we are all in this together. And anyone who's worked as a nurse in any kind of department, inpatient, outpatient, you can't do it alone. You can't. It's so important to really be intentional about trying to create those relationships and foster them and cultivate them so that everyone's work feels a little bit lighter, because they know that they don't have to shoulder the burden of any given situation or any given day by themselves, because they have their teammates to support them.
Absolutely.
So we've talked a little bit about this earlier, but what effect does a belonging environment have on patients and families and overall care? And is there anything additional that nurses should consider to foster those feelings of belonging among their patients as well?
Jamie, it's all good. When you have a sense of belonging, it's really just fantastic, because when you feel you are truly part of a care team, you'll be working as your best self, your authentic self. You feel supported and respected. Patient outcomes will definitely be improved. It is proved the fact that will happen. Science has told us that, has shared that with us. Studies have shared with us about that. And Jamie, I want to say, as nurses, we are able to connect, because that is what our profession is truly about, focus on relationships, right? We're taught how to connect with our patients, to foster feelings of belonging. We do that every day. What we need to do is do that with each other. We know what it looks like with our patients. We need to do it with each other. And I like how you said, Jamie, that we're not in this alone, and to feel that connectedness. And it's the small little things that do it. And I want to share a story with you. As we're talking, I remembered when I first started in my organization, I was one of the first Black nurses hired, and not feeling a sense of belonging. And it was one act of kindness that opened it up for me. And I remember this, and it came back, I said, as we're talking today, and it came back to me, is I remember walking to a room, and it was a very important meeting with nurse leaders. And I walked into the room, and I was the only Black face there. The room was full of white faces, all white women. And there was not a chair at the table for me. I walked in, and the room was filled, and everybody was at the table, and there was no extra chairs for me to sit at this table. So I was leaning up against the wall, and I felt very uncomfortable and out of place, and that I didn't belong. And a nurse got up, and she went to this closet, and she got a chair, and she pulled a chair out, and she put it right beside her, and she patted on the chair for me to sit down. And I came and I sat down next to her. And that act alone made me feel, like you said, Jamie, that I wasn't alone, that somebody saw me, somebody sees me and recognizes me. And that opened it up that, okay, it was a start that, okay, I do belong to this organization. It began with this nurse. And so those one little small moments like that will open it up and made me feel better and feel like I'm part of belonging of this environment. So that's something like saying this is, what can we do? As one little small act that makes a difference, because it made all the difference in the world for me. It really opened it up, that I started to see, okay, I can belong here. I can start working with this.
I love that. That's a great example. And, we connect the importance of seeing and prioritizing the relationships we build with our team and our coworkers, that it can't help but spill over into our patients. And in oncology, sometimes inpatient, but definitely in the outpatient realm, we have the benefit of seeing our patients over time, building those relationships with repeated visits. over cycles, over months and years. And so we build those same relationships with our patients as well. And one thing I have experienced is that the patients can tell when the team has a feeling of belonging. They can sense if one nurse seems to be sort of on the outs and not part of the group. That influences the patients and how they perceive their team and how their team acts and works together. And so, again, just the benefits of prioritizing this work can't be overstated, because I think the most important and direct benefit is to ourselves as nurses, as professionals, but it quickly spills over into the benefits to our patients, to their caregivers, to their families, because the work that we do in oncology really is finding people at their worst sometimes. And so anything that we can do to help bolster our own feelings about our work and our teammates, and then having that directly impact the patients and the caregivers that we serve, it certainly is a worthy endeavor.
Right. And I like what you're saying too, Jamie, that about caring. If we cannot care for ourselves and our colleagues that we're working with, how can we care for others, right? It's so true that when we're caring for each other, we can care for our patients. And you're right, patients can see when things are disjointed, when there's not a flow, when there's not a cohesive team. We're humans. If we're insulted, if we're hurt. What I mean, I'm sorry, Jamie, is that we're animals, right? So if we're hurt or insulted, we tend to retrieve to go in. We're not going to go out. And so people see that when you go in and you're not really sharing and working as a team to deliver this effective and efficient patient care, not part of the whole team, there's a gap, there's a missing. You're not able to add your expertise in the outcome of this patient's care. And when you're missing that, you're missing completely give that care, completely be yourself. So what I'm trying to say is that feeling that you belong, feeling that you're respected and valued. When you feel that way, you feel you're part of the team and you're going to contribute to the outcomes for good patient care and also for staff safety. So it's huge, a sense of belonging and understanding that and putting it into action. You know, we talk about words and definition, but how do we make it more actionable? How do you make sense of belonging actionable? And one way that I share with you is that offer of a cheer. This little small things of being aware of that, you're being aware of what's around you and looking at what your colleague may need and getting that without asking.
I think the one thing that I'm always struck with when we discuss topics like this is that I know for nurses that are in the thick of it and they're, up to their eyeballs in documentation and patients and joint commission and, just like a million things. And I know that these types of discussions can feel like just one more thing, but this isn't fluff. This isn't something nice to do if you've got the time, or, oh, it's just one of those things that the administration wants. If it feels that way, then you can acknowledge the way that it feels, but I would challenge everyone to just also consider that maybe it really is important. And maybe it is, while it feels like just a nice to do when you can, if we could focus and prioritize this work, it could potentially create solutions for other larger problems that create more pressing issues in your day-to-day work. So I would just challenge everyone you can react. Everyone is entitled to their own reaction, but this really is important. It's not just a fluffy kind of on the top if you've got time for it. Really trying investing in yourself and your teammates to create that great sense of belonging at the place where you do your work, I think will have enormous benefits that will spill over into all areas of your life, including the care that you provide to patients.
Absolutely.
Well, Kecia, I've really enjoyed our conversation today. And as we approach the tail end of our episode, I do like to ask a few quick fire questions to summarize some of the things we've talked about. So to kick that off, how can oncology nurses evaluate their own implicit bias when it comes to belonging and inclusion?
So, Jamie, we all have unconscious bias. If you have a brain, you're biased. Biases are just due from a lifetime exposure to cultural attitudes, previous experiences, social class, gender, race, just to name a few. But how we can look at that, as like we talked about, is that to begin this change, to talk about sense of belonging, it begins with us individually, of our own self-awareness, of our self-reflecting. And we can do that. There are free implicit bias tests that are online. One that just comes to mind is the Harvard Implicit Association test that's online, because we have to acknowledge that we have biases and what those biases are. And once we know that we can work on that and kind of put a filter on before we jump to a conclusion, it's like, where am I at with this? Where are my biases? Where are my assumptions? And for that. So I think that's very important because we have to address our implicit bias or unconscious bias in order to build relationships, correct? Because if we come to the table with our unconscious bias, it can really derail our questions and perceptions of people. If we have these associations, for example, that a family is just composed of a man and a woman, it's not always that way, right? Now we know that sometimes a family is two men or same sex or transgender. So we kind of watch our perspectives. We're coming to the table to ask the questions, building relationships, where our biases. So it is important that we check those.
What are some common misconceptions about DEI strategies, including belonging?
We're all on this journey now, right? So I know in 2020, when we have the murder of George Floyd and the many other unarmed Black men and women, combined with the pandemic, showed us a lot about the social injustices, the justice in healthcare. We have to understand that this journey, it's a journey. It's one step at a time. It's not going to change overnight. And that we need to be in this together. And we need to give each other grace and ourselves grace as we learn, as we grow. Because now as nurses, in this, what we're dealing with now is that it is our professional and personal responsibility to address these injustices, to look about racism in nursing. It's part of our duty now. It's a journey. We're in this together. I do believe that by ourselves, we're a movement. But together, as large as our forces, as large as our nurses in oncology, we can be a force and move together with this. So the misconceptions is that one step at a time, it's not going to happen overnight. It's a journey. And we are accountable to be accountable for the changes in our ID journey.
I love that. And it's progress, not perfection, right?
There you go. I love that. Right, Jamie?
We won't get it right every time. We'll still make mistakes. We'll mess up. But you can acknowledge those. You can apologize. You can do better and you can learn. So I love that. What's something about this topic that's not often discussed, but you wish people knew more about?
Being willing to be uncomfortable. We have to learn to be uncomfortable with that. We don't talk enough about that because I believe that growth and comfort can never coexist because as you're growing, as we're changing, it's uncomfortable. And so to talk more about that, it's okay to be uncomfortable and to learn to be comfortable with that because we can't grow without feeling uncomfortable.
What additional training or education do oncology nurses need to contribute to DEI and belonging strategies that we've talked about today?
One is I love what ONS is doing, what it's offering for us to learn in this ID space to be better stewards. I think the training needs to begin with each of us individually to perhaps go to our websites on the internet or even at our organizations. Like my organization has a website just for ID&E, learning and education, because that's important. It begins with us. We talk about, I think of the pillars of our ID&E journey, like the top pillar or the level is the organization. And then you have a second level is just the management, like you have nurse directors and nurse leaders, kind of the middle part, that middle ground. And then you have the lower level. I think the most important level is us doing that chairside, bedside nursing. We're all responsible to all these levels, but it has to begin with us. So the strategy is your awareness. We talked about sense of belonging. We talked about what can you do to welcome new members on your floor, offering a chair, sharing a story, introducing yourself, using your pronouns, things like that. What can we do to make a difference? Small wins accumulate to large wins, and it starts out small. So I think that's important of our strategies, taking what we can do as individuals.
And what are some additional resources maybe for patients, other nurses, or other providers on the healthcare team who want to learn more about DEI?
The web is wonderful. I Googled quite a bit. There's a lot of different search engines. There's a lot of information now out there about different resources to learn for us to be better, do better. All these sites. And like I said, our organizations have different sites to go to. So it varies where you can find this information from. But basically, I know if you want to, if you're intentional of doing it, go to a search engine and type it in and go from there.
Kecia, thank you again for your time, your expertise. It has been a great conversation. And I'm so thankful that we were able to talk about this discussion today. Do you have any final comments for our listeners?
Yes, Jamie. I really hope this podcast will lead us in a direction where we're not just aware of the importance of this building a sense of belonging in our units or an organization, but think of it in ways to educate ourselves, to empower ourselves, to build connections, healthy relationships with those we share workspaces with. Because I really believe that this sense of belonging is the outcome of inclusivity, diversity, and equity.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Kecia.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you for listening to the Oncology Nursing Podcast. Tell us about your favorite part in this episode by leaving a review wherever you download your podcast. For more resources and information about oncology nursing, visit us at ons.org or voice.ons.org. The ideas and opinions shared in this episode represent those of the guest and not necessarily ONS.